All right, guys, let's go ahead and come on in and get started. Let's get started. Uh, Good to have y'all with us tonight. Good to see everybody out. Um, we're going to have two of our young guys, this one and that one. They're going to come up and lead us in a song. And then we'll have our devotional, and Mr. Josh is going to lead us in an invitation song. What is that invitation? 909? 909. If you will, grab a book. 909. And when these guys get up to lead their song, join in with them heartily. That's what we're supposed to do when we sing. Join in heartily. And tell them what a good job they've been doing. Just grab a kid, the young man that leads singing, and tell them thank you. All right, let's go, guys.
(9:15). Trust and obey. Trust and obey. First and last verse. 9:15. 915.
Away in a Manger, 1017. Away in a manger, no crib for a bed. The little Jesus weighed down his sweet head. The stars in the sky looked down where he went. The little Lord Jesus lay asleep on the
Good evening. It is a pleasure to see each of you here. Tonight I am going to be talking from 2 Corinthians chapter 5, looking kind of at the first few verses there. In this passage, it starts off with this phrasing or this thought of how we know that our earthly home is going to be destroyed. Now, the context of the chapter before is he's talking about us, this physical world that you and I dwell in. The image is we know that we are going to die at some point. That this body, that this world, it's going to decay, it's going to be burned up, whichever comes first. But the thought is it will be destroyed. But the second part, or I guess the middle part of verse 1 is, it says, even though this is going to be destroyed, it says we have a home that is being built or is built by God. I used to live in a house that I was very proud we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed so that this world may be swallowed up by life. Now, that phrasing is being swallowed up by life is very interesting. But the image that's being painted here is, it's not that we want to take off this body. It's not that we look at life and we're depressed and sad and angry all the time. Again, moments, highs and lows of life understood. But it's not that we're longing to set this off, but it's the understanding that it will be. And because this body will be destroyed, we want to make sure that we have that one that Christ is building for us. That one that is indestructible and eternal. The one that's not going to decay or ache or hurt as time goes by. Then look at verse number 6. It says, we are always of good courage, and we know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith and not by sight, yet we yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. The image is, here we are, right? Any of you got to go to work tomorrow? I won't say who it was, but a few of you already complained to me about maybe some, not maybe burdens or really difficult things, but some issues tomorrow or this week at work. Anybody else got those? We live in this world, right? This is the body. We're not longing to leave, but we are longing to leave. We know that this won't last. We know that God is building that home. This tent, this tabernacle, go back to chapter 4, the end of it, it talks about this earthen vessel, these jars. That's us too. They're eventually going to be broken. But God will remove us. If we are the child, the obedient individuals, the people that submit themselves to God and His will. If you go back to the end of self is wasting away. Our inner self is renewed day by day. Any of you need to be renewed tonight? Any of you want tomorrow to be a fresh start? Any of you, when you lay your head on your pillow tonight, will say, God, make those problems of tomorrow less. So that's the image. That's us. We're here, we're working, we have life, we have its problems and distress. But that's not who we are. This life, its world, its problems, we focus on Christ. We focus on the home we have. We have 909. If you have a need, if you have any issue that's keeping you from God, maybe like it's described here, you feel like that earthen vessel, that tent or tabernacle was maybe a little worn down and well used. God can refresh you and renew you day by day. But as I always say, you have to make the step. You have to make the decision. It's not yours. That Jesus, that Christ, that the gospel, that it's something that's important to you, not just tonight, but tomorrow morning. When you're facing those issues, when the good times happen, when the difficult moments arise. When in our life is guided by the call of God, I want to be with you more. So again, if you need the help in the prayers of this congregation in any way, would you come forward together as we stand and as we sing? His mother passed away just a little bit ago, so be aware of that and keeping him in the thought for the next few days and be listening out for announcements. Also, we need to keep Kim Bradshaw in our prayers as we set out. She is dealing with some health issues and they're trying to, I guess, figure out what's causing these flare-ups for her. So if you would, mindful of her, they can figure out how to treat what's going on with her. Also, Paul has mentioned that his nephew, Matthew Preston, is in the hospital and he is dealing with some health issues as well, and they're trying to take care of that. So I pray that his brother and his family can help take care of that. Also, he had a neighbor, Mike Mazer, who suffered a stroke today, so be prayerful for him. Are there any others that we need to add to our prayer list or updates to those who are on? So your grandmother's beginning trials for lung cancer. So if you would pray for what's her name? Let's keep her on her trials for lung cancer. Any others? Any updates or anything? Right, by way of announcements, ladies, if you would remember, on the 12th will be the Wings Bible Study. That will be at on the road to the ambulance. February 21st is going to be a cleanup day and rotate here in the building. I guess I'll make sure to say this is not just for men. Ladies, if you know of anything that needs to be cleaned up, up to work on too. Make sure it's gotten to the elders so we can take care of that. Also, Ladies' Day, February 28th, there is some flyers in the foyer if you'd like some more information about that. Also, there is a sign-up list in the foyer for the Widows and Widowers Luncheon February 15th. So we need to sign up for kids for that, and also for those who are going to kids to help and the kids. Oh, for food. It helps out with stuff. So those are really great things for that, and we're looking at. Also, February 15th will be the Bible Bowl, so parents can aware, kids keep that in mind also. Anything else? Thank you. Let's bow with us. Your loving and gracious and mighty Heavenly Father, we are thankful for this time, this place, where we can worship you and praise you, and we can open your word and study. We pray that we will be encouraged, we will be uplifted by what we look at and what we study tonight. We pray that we will spend our lives and use our efforts to glorify and worship you. We thank you so much for Jesus, hope of heaven that we have in him. We ask you to please be with our number that we mentioned that are sick, that are dealing with issues. Please be with those that are dealing with loss of loved ones. Then we thank you for Christ. Classes can take your place. All right, we are continuing our study looking in the book of Acts. We have gotten about to the middle of chapter 5, so we'll pick up there in just a moment. All right, in Acts chapter 5, we've, like I said, gotten about halfway through, and we are still dealing with essentially the repercussions right after Acts chapter 2, the few days or weeks, a very short time period after that. In chapter 6 and 7, there's even still a few phrases there that we'll try to note that kind of tie back or use the same imagery of Acts chapter 2, verse 47. So still seems to be this same short period after Acts chapter 2. So far in chapter 5, we've looked at the first part. There's this plot by Ananias and Sapphira to deceive the Holy Spirit. End of chapter 4 was Barnabas and his encouragement and willingness to give with this contrast. Then we have the wife and her opportunity to do what's right. And I think this is just going to show that even though we might plan to do evil, even if in the moment we make the decision to stop, there's still forgiveness and mercy that can be found in that. All right, then after that, verses 12 through 16 is essentially the apostles, their boldness, them Look at verse 13 for this one. None of the rest dared to join them, but the people held them in high esteem. So the image is there are those apostles right outside the temple, or at least in a gathering spot near it, and they are preaching and teaching in the name of Christ. The authorities, the council, the high priests, they're against it, but have kind of been hands off. But in chapter 5, they get a little bit more angry. I don't know the right way to phrase this, but the council finally lets their frustration out. It's not on any of the 12, but it's, well, actually, I'm jumping ahead, so I'm going to be quiet and get into our text. Verses 17 through 26 then begins off with the high priest rose up and all who were with him and the party of the Sadducees. So high priest, remember that those who were in the religious leadership position, most of them did not believe in the resurrection. That's the Sadducees. Then, in a moment, skip down to verse number 33, you'll see Gamaliel there. He kind of represents the Pharisees. So the council here is the Sadducees, the Pharisees. They call together this council, and notice what is the middle part of verse 17. What is their problem with what's going on? They're filled with what? Now, what does that mean? I know that's pretty, elementary thing, but filled with jealousy. All right, go back to what we just looked at in verse 13. The people were holding them in high esteem. The Sadducees, they were the high priest there in verse 17, and he's mad that the people like those guys versus us. Now, what's the problem with that? Would any of you be mad at me if I was able to teach a lost person and baptize them? But you're mad because you didn't get to do it. Does that make sense to you guys? That's where they're at. Here are these apostles doing all these great wonders and signs and miracles, and what are the high priests and Pharisees and the priests and all of them doing? No, that's even a good way to put it. It's even worse than that. They're detrimental to the church. But anyway, the thought is, here are these men that are jealous because we're not getting the esteem. But notice verse 18. So what'd they do? They arrest the apostles. I'm mad, so we arrest them. Threw them in jail. But notice verse number 20. They're in prison. An angel comes to them and releases them. And notice the phrasing that's used here. It says, "Go and stand in the temple and speak to the people all words of this life." Anybody different translation? The end of verse 20. Message of life. Anybody else? I think that gets the thought here. It is the words of hope, words of life. There's a sermon coming up that'll be connected to this. I don't remember the passage off the top of my head. I just remember it's connected. So Sunday, remember this passage here, this phrasing, words of life. Go back and read that then. All, full. Not part, not just, we'll use this phrasing here, not just the Old Testament and its prophecies and its laws and all the lists of things to do, but also the prophecies about who's coming, right? About Jesus and the Messiah and the Christ. And anyway, verse number 21. When they heard, the angel, I missed the biggest part there. The angel lets them out of the prison. Where do they go and what do they do? They're in prison for doing what? And what do they go do? You get the idea. Thrown in jail, an angel comes and lets them out. They go right back to what they were doing. No hesitation, no stopping. There's not any, should we consider something different? But also look at this. I didn't realize this till this study, so I want to use this moment for you guys to say, keep studying, all right? I can't tell you how many times I've read Matthew chapter 5. No bragging here, not trying to toot my own horn with this, but I've studied Acts a lot. I used to teach Acts to prisoners, and that's what I did for about 10 years straight, just the book of Acts. But I never noticed this phrasing or this thought here. Here are the Sadducees. They don't believe in the resurrection. They don't believe in the miraculous, angels. And these men they put in prison, what happened to them? The miraculous beat them. The divine overtook their jealousy and anger. I guess I'd always recognized that thought, but it makes it even stronger when you look at it from the point of these are mainly the Sadducees at this point that don't believe in the miraculous, the resurrection. And these men are like, okay, well, an angel came and let us out, so we're going to go keep preaching. For us, the world might say a lot of stuff to us, but what has the message given us? What does the word of life teach us? What does the message of, you get the idea here. We do this, not what the world teaches. Then you look at the verse 36 there. After this, they're still jealous. They're still angry, the council, the high priest. But they have a problem. Because if you go and roughneck the people who are healing the lame, helping the blind to see, that are performing miracles in front of everybody, and you go grab them by the scruff of their neck and pull them out, what might happen? They're scared of the people. Now, again, this seems very ironic to me, because what were they after that caused them to be jealous? The esteem of the people, right? But here it's not about esteem, it's about, I'm afraid of them. Now, think about it from this standpoint. Are we seeking the glory, the esteem, the reputation of the world? Or are we seeking the esteem and reputation of God? Are we going to be jealous after what the world does, or are we going to be jealous after what God teaches us and shows us to be? All right. The next thought here, next section, 27 through 32, he moves on to, well, I guess it's the rebuttal. We have the people, the council, question them. Now, notice they don't say anything about how they escaped, right? Or at least it's not recorded for us. That would be a question I would have if I was on this council. Now again, maybe they ask it, maybe it's not there, but he kind of skips over that glaring problem, right? But he says, we told you not to speak in his name, didn't we? And you are trying to bring this man's blood on us. Now, what do you find funny about that situation or about that statement? You guys, Peter, John, the apostle, y'all are trying to make us the bad guys. Again, what's funny about that? They're the bad guys. Their blood, the blood of Christ, was on whose hands? This council. I think I've got the passage up there. Yeah, Matthew 27, that's where they said, his blood be what? So who's making this connection here? Now he's saying it right, but they were the ones at first that said, okay, we'll take the blame if anything bad happens. And then when they see all this happening, again, God, the church, these apostles, these disciples, this healing, they're like, we didn't do it. That wasn't us. Any of you ever seen maybe a celebrity or a politician who will be real strong on some topic or issue, and then he'll realize, or they'll realize, hey, that's going to cause me to lose votes, that's going to cause people not to like me, so they backpedal a little bit and change it. That's them. These people are standing there saying, here's what the world wants. We're jealous of them. We want the esteem. But that's what they're gaining it from us. Look, if you would, verse 28. Or no, 29. Peter and the apostles answered. If you haven't memorized this phrasing here, I would encourage you to do so, because it is the answer to many, many issues in life. Somebody quote it for me. Now, what does that mean? We must obey God rather than men. Go back to the apostles when Jesus is about to ascend, and he tells them to do what? Go into all the world, preach the gospel, teach every creature, baptizing. So here are these same men that saw Christ ascend up into heaven, was given that message to teach, preach, and baptize, and now this group of men who haven't really been doing the job they're supposed to, right, are telling us we've got to be quiet. What am I going to do? The God that ascended to heaven, the Christ that I saw on the cross and saw in front of me, or these guys that are mad because I was teaching in His name and an angel let me out of their prison? And you get the weight of this, right? We ought to obey God rather than men. But then he finishes it out, verse 30. The God of our fathers raised Jesus. Now he's making this claim very simple. There's no wiggle room. He says, God raised Jesus, and what did you guys do to him? You killed him. Again, don't put his blood on our hands, even though they had said put his blood on our hands. He's making the statement, you hung him on the cross, you did this. Now verse 31. God exalted him at his right hand as leader and Savior to give repentance to Israel, forgiveness of sins, and we are witnesses of these things. Essentially, they're standing in front of this council, this elite group of religious and cultural elite. And he's like, I don't care who you are. God told me to preach. God told me to keep talking, and that's what's going to happen. Again, go back, Acts chapter 2, that day of Pentecost, that being endued with power, the difficulties, the ups and downs that have been going on here. And we get to this point here where they're saying, we've got to do what we're supposed to do. Now, I don't know whether this is a standard thing that happens, but the next section, we have Gamaliel brought in. He's part of this council. More than likely, he, again, represents the Pharisees. He's the one that Saul studied under. So he is a well-known rabbi of the time. But notice, before we even jump into that, verse 33. When they heard this, the statement of, we should do what God says rather than people. What did these men do? Say it louder. They want to kill these guys. Not just a little angry, not just perturbed, not just, they messed up some, but let's put them to death. That is the only option and solution in these guys' minds. Furious. Gnashing of teeth, kind of the image there, so angry that you're just... But let's read a little bit. Verse 33, when they heard this, they were enraged, wanted to kill him, but a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, teacher of the law, then it goes on to describe him a little bit, but I'm going to boil down his argument. He says, don't you remember these two rebellions that we had before? He mentions the fellows there, Theudius, however you would say that, and then Judas the Galilean. He mentions those two fellows to talk about a historical event. So Gamaliel is standing there saying, don't you remember those two rebellions we had where these guys that thought they were great just died and were wiped out and nothing happened? Let's just do that with these guys. Let's just wait and see. Let's just step back, and if God's with them, then they'll succeed, and if God is against them, they'll fall flat on their face. Now again, paraphrase that. Read it for yourself, get the context there. But Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, somebody who was standing in the position saying, they were being accused of blasphemy, right? They were accused of, they're really jealous. There's really no issue for this. But he says, let's just back off. Let's just not deal with the issue. God will take care of it. Now, I am the first to say I would rather God deal with all the issues in my life than me, because I know I'm going to mess it up somehow. I'm going to trip, I'm going to stumble, I'm not going to see something. But sometimes that's part of the process of life, right? Figuring out, learning, growing, experiencing, understanding that I am stronger and can overcome because of God and my faith. But these guys just say, let's just back off and we'll let God take care of it. Now again, we should do that in our life. And that's the problem. Because they were jealous, they wanted the esteem, and because at the moment they had it under the system the way it was, they rejected fact and proof. They rejected the evidence, the prophecies, again, all of these things that build up Christ as being who He said He was. They couldn't see it because they were jealous, because they had something they wanted more than God. And I think, personal thought here, I think that's why it made him so angry at this situation. Because he's almost calling them out, kind of like Stephen does a little bit later on. He's almost calling them out for their poor attitude. You guys, look what you're doing. We're just out here preaching and teaching. We're out here trying to do what God wants us to do, and you're just throwing us in prison? All right, let's move on to the next thought then. So after this, we move into chapter 6. All right, so, very quickly, let's look at the last verse in chapter 5. It says, and every day in the temple and from house to house, they did not cease teaching and preaching that Christ is Jesus. Now, notice the phrasing there at the end. What were they preaching? That Christ is Jesus. The phrasing, the thought is not that, sometimes we have that Jesus Christ, it's that same name. They were talking about Christ as that Old Testament prophecy of a Messiah. So these men were standing in front of this council, Dale, like you said, that should have known the law, at least well enough to recognize it. And he was saying, Jesus is the one the law talked about. Jesus is the Christ. Now, that gets us into 6. Now, again, while all this is going on, the apostles are dealing with the council, the temple right there. We have a moment of looking at the church itself, Christians, and an issue that they're dealing with. Verse 6, now in these days when the disciples were increasing in number. Now that increasing in number, again, very similar to the thought in Acts 2:47. So probably still that same time period going on. But during that time, there was a complaint against the Hellenists, arose against the Hebrews. Now, this is the Jewish Christians, those that were raised in Jerusalem and the area around proper Christian or proper Jews, I guess you'd say. The rest would be either proselytes from other nations, or in this context, it's probably talking more about It's talking about the Jews that would be traveling back in from the other areas, the Hellenistic or the worldly Jews that have returned to Jerusalem for that day of Pentecost and those feast days. So they're standing there looking at it saying, our widows aren't being taken care of. Now, is it ever a good thing for a widow or those in need to suffer or to go without? If we as God's people have the ability and opportunity to help those in this situation, should we? Absolutely. So it's not should we do this, but there's a problem in how it's being done. They said that their widows, or the Greek background widows, were being overlooked. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, whether it was actually happening, whether it was a perceived slight by the Gentile Jews or the Greek Jews to the Gentiles. But think about how the Jews viewed the outside world and people other than of their own race. They're lower than us. Even today, you can still see a lot of that attitude still in there. But the thought is, it's very possible that they were looking at it saying, okay, here's my mom and dad, here's aunt and uncle that I've met in the street, but then there's that group of people that we've never really met. They come every so often, but they help them too. So they choose out from among themselves. Well, before they get to that, they call a council of the apostles and the disciples. The phrasing there kind of gives the image that everybody, all the Christians in Jerusalem gathered, the apostles and disciples. And they said, here's the issue. The apostles give us a very good pattern to follow. And that is, the apostles kind of look at it and say, our responsibility is to be out preaching and evangelizing, healing the sick, doing those kind of things. But it needs to be done, right? We're not going to stop preaching in order to serve tables, is the phrasing that it uses. The tables need to be served, but they're saying our responsibility lies elsewhere. So they find good men, good reputation, and there's a few other. It's nobody I know. It's a spam risk, so. Satan trying to get me off my train of thought there. All right, they've got the 7 men that they call together, these good reputation. Oftentimes we use this passage to describe our deacons, their work of the church today. Most likely, it doesn't say that they're deacons in this position, but I think they fit what's going on or what's being described later on. But again, we don't know all the qualifications in the background. The point is, apostles picked out these men and said, you go and take care of the issue. And what did these men do? Please shake your head. They took care. They went into the work. They served those widows. They did what was necessary. What were the apostles able to do because those men served the widows? All right. You get the image that's being painted here. The apostles are standing there, in my mind, saying, this work needs to be done. We can do it, but we can do so much more over here. So why, instead of taking me away from my area of service where God has appointed me, where I have the ability, the talent, and putting me over here, not that they wouldn't do it, but why not find somebody else that has maybe a talent or an ability or has the willingness to serve in that area so that more work can be done? I have a problem of trying to do things by myself. I don't need help. I can approach it. I can figure out a way to hold things in place, or whatever the issue. That's not how the church works, though, right? At least it's not how it's supposed to be. Even Jesus sent his apostles out by twos, right? Sent them out in groups and pairs. The image here is the apostle said, do the work, but let's work together. So think about what you're able to do. Think about what talents or responsibilities. Think about the area of service in life that you have access or talent for. Don't try to steal mine, but find your own way to serve. Now, if you want to get up here and preach and teach, do it. I'd love to see people grow, but you get the image. Each of us find our ways that we can serve God. That body fitly joined together, right? You notice there at the end, I just want to make this statement, all the names that are listed there, they're all of Greek origin, I guess. More than likely, they picked men that had some kind of connection to that community or group. The point being, it's not just somebody thrown into a work, but it's somebody that seems to have a connection with it. All right, next section in this is we move on, we stay with Stephen, but I guess that first man that's mentioned there. Now remember, he was told to go out and serve these widows, but somebody read chapter 6, verse 8, if they would. What is Stephen doing? All right, what does that mean to you? What was he doing? I think teaching would be included in this. Healing the sick, the signs and wonders. But wasn't he commanded to serve the widows? So that's the point, right? He had an area of responsibility that the leaders gave him, that through God and His authority they were placed in. But that didn't relieve him of the other responsibilities that God expects of all of us, right? We're here tonight to worship. Does that mean tomorrow we don't have to act like Christians? Does that mean we can, take off and do things on the weekend and just come back and check the box again? These people, the image of these men is they're already preaching and teaching. They're already serving and working, but now they're given a specific area. Hey guys, we see your work, we see your effort. Can you focus this way or that way? I think that's how we need to be, don't we? Maury, would it be great if you had people asking you, hey, where can I serve? Where can I work? Would that be a good thing? What if they then said, hey, I can do this or that, or I have this talent or that talent, or put me in this place or that position? That would be great, right? That's what these men essentially are showing. That's what we need to do. Work and serve, go out into life and fumble and mess up trying to teach people, or put your best foot forward and stick your foot in your mouth and get up and do better, but keep serving. Not just the one thing, right? I'm a preacher, so that means I don't have to be the father I should be, because I'm helping to teach all you guys, so that's a bigger responsibility, right? It's a different responsibility, but it's still a responsibility. We can do a lot of things. We have a lot of talents, capabilities, and opportunities in our congregation because of you. But each of us have to reach out to them. Each of us have to strive to do it. All right, so back to Stephen then here, second half of chapter 6. Here's this man full of grace, working miracles, out serving the widows, out taking care of people in need. And he goes in verse 9. He's, I guess, teaching and preaching in this area. It says the synagogue of the freedmen. More than likely, this was a synagogue made up of released Roman slaves or exiles or something of that nature. So they would have been seen almost as a second-hand Jews even. But here they are, released slaves, and it goes on to mention the Cyrenians, Alexandrians, those from Cilicia and Asia. So the image is some of those that had come in for those feast days as well. They were at one of their synagogues, where they should be, under the Jewish system, being taught worshiping, praising God with their people. But some of those of the synagogue get mad at Stephen. They get angry at what he is preaching and teaching. Yes, sir. I think so. Absolutely. Well, especially when you connect it with verse 8, how he's going out and doing, working wonders and great signs. More than likely, he has the ability or some gift to work some miracles or whatever those gifts would be in this time. So yes, he was one that was already showing himself to be faithful in preaching and then was given this responsibility. But again, these men, other travelers or sojourner Jews that would be in Jerusalem during these feast times, they get mad at the message. But notice what they do. Verse 10, they could not withstand the wisdom and the spirit with which he was speaking. I wish I had that. Don't you? Don't you wish that you had the wisdom of God to guide you exactly what to say or how to phrase things or how to set it up so that people couldn't withstand it? Because like I said, I've put my foot in my mouth several times with studies or different things in life, but nothing he said they could speak against. But then notice what they do. Verse 11, they secretly instigate. Verse 12, they stir up the peoples, the elders, the scribes. Verse 13, they set up false witnesses who essentially say Stephen was blaspheming Moses, the temple, talking about how Jesus would tear it down and rebuild it. That's what they accused him of. And while that's technically true, right? Jesus did say he would tear down the temple and rebuild it. That's not exactly what Stephen is preaching, right? But they take this, and it's all deceit. It's all lies. It's all back talk. It's all nothing that's true. Then verse number 14 says, number 15. I was right. In 14. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and will change the customs that Moses delivered to us. Now, essentially they're saying he's going to take the law and make it into something else, which again, Christ did, right? That's what he's preaching, but it's not a blasphemy of the Old Testament. It's a fulfillment, right? Verse number 15. And gazing at him, all who sat in the council. Now, hold yourself there, council. Who is this council? More than likely, it's the Sanhedrin. The next verse in the next chapter, we're introduced to the high priest again. So even though we're not shown that he's brought before them, we see that verse 12, brought him before the council. It's that same council that we've been discussing with all of the other events with Peter and John, right? So here's a separate individual brought before the same group of men. Again, it's those few days, weeks right after Acts chapter 2. This seems to be a constant occurrence, is what I'm trying to get at. They've brought Peter and John in there twice. They've got Stephen in there this time. They have, what happens at the next chapter, right? They take care of him. This can't be all there is, right? There's probably a lot more distress going on in this moment. This council is in panic mode, if you will. So they pull him in there, they get him before him, saw that his face was like the face of an angel. I am sure there's a lot of stuff that this means and could be applied to, and there's probably a lot that even I haven't connected it with. But the one that I see is that with Moses on the mountain when he comes down. And it's that thought of Moses was in the presence of God and he changed because of it. So here is Stephen preaching, standing up before this council. Nothing can be held against him, right? So I see this moment as he's sitting there as innocent as an angel. He's sitting there with no guilt, no shame, no power. Now, it could be that physical countenance. It could be, again, something like Moses and what happened there. But I think the context seems to be more of Stephen was innocent in everything. Stephen stood there and he said what he said because he had a clean heart and a clear conscience. If you know you didn't do something wrong, can you speak better or stand up for yourself better than if you know you did something wrong? At least that's the way it usually should work. So here he is, standing up for God. You know, I'm out here healing the sick, helping the whatever. I've been helping the widows and making sure they're fed. And what are you guys doing? You're throwing me in jail. You're lying and accusing me of blaspheming God. You're twisting my words in order to make me look bad. Now, any of you feel any connection with Stephen, maybe in how the world's treated us or the gospel or our standing up for the truth? The body language shows the heart. But here he stands, countenance of an angel. He stands justified before God. There's nothing these men can say that will change him spiritually because he knows what and who God is. Now, very quickly, I want to look at chapter 7 and verse 1, and we'll kind of hold there. Verse 1, the high priest said, "Are these things so?" Now, I want you to look at that question and then jump over to almost the last part of the chapter, verses 44 down through about verse 48. That's your homework for next week. Look at the question that this high priest asked. Dale, again, going off you, they should have known, right? The prophecies of Christ, the things that this coming Messiah would fulfill and do and be. So they asked the question, are these things so? When all of the evidence was in front of them. Again, look at this phrasing, this question, and compare it to how Stephen stands firmly in front of them when essentially the highest authority in the land is against them. Imagine standing before the Supreme Court and arguing your case about being a Christian before them. Do you think you could argue better than the Supreme Court? Or a trained lawyer or judge? But Stephen, this young man, nothing could be held against him. All right, appreciate your time and attention. Any thoughts or comments with what we've looked at or discussed? All right, appreciate your time and attention. We'll see y'all on Sunday.